Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jamie, and if you are familiar with my previous videos, you might be aware that I have been building now for some time a standard 1300 engine which will eventually go in my Carman gear project. I have actually put it into my 64 Beetle here because I'm going to use that to test run for the first time. So there's a few things we need to do before we actually get the engine running, and one of them is to get the oil pressure. On a new engine, there's no oil actually inside the oil galleries, so you need to pump that around, get the oil pressure up before you even do the first start. In one of my previous videos when I was fitting the oil pump, I packed it full of grease, and what that does, it helps suck the oil through for the first time from the sump and get it pumping around the oil galleries. So looking at the engine, I haven't connected the fuel supply, the distributor isn't connected, so it's not going to fire up because you obviously need three things for an engine to run. We need a spark, we need fuel, and we need compression. So the first thing I'm going to do is connect this simple oil pressure gauge to where the oil pressure switch is located. So this basically sends a signal to the light on your dashboard on the speedo if you have a drop in oil pressure and warns you should stop the engine. So we're going to remove that and just add it with the gauge. Okay, as you can see, I've connected the oil pressure gauge and I've just hung it there. So I'll set the GoPro up so you can watch the pressure come up, hopefully, if everything's okay. Well, as you saw, there was no oil pressure, and when I came round to the back of the engine, I noticed it's leaking oil. I am being so plagued by oil leaks, it's unreal. And guess what? It looks like it's coming from the oil cooler. Can you believe it? So I think I'm going to have to investigate that first. Okay, so it's a couple of days later and I've just whipped the engine out. No big deal, only took half an hour because most of the stuff is not connected anyway. But I can clearly see, take a look here, you can see that it's wet here and also at the back, which is indicating the oil leak coming from the oil cooler. Okay, with just a few screws and a couple of bolts, the fan shroud just lifts up and over the oil cooler. So if we take a closer look, you can clearly see that that is where the leak is coming from. So let's whip off this oil cooler. Right, with the oil cooler removed, you can clearly see the style of seals that I used, which was recommended in the book, but I believe, let's see if they fit, that it should be. These don't fit. Aha. I need another plan. So it's a few days later and I have come up with a solution. Let me show you. So after a little bit of research, I have found that there are three types of early oil cooler. Two of them have 8mm oil gallery holes and one of them has 10, and it seems that I have what I would assume is the later one has 10mm holes in the oil cooler, but quite rightly, as the book stated, these are the right seals for this engine case, but they are to be used with an oil cooler that has 8mm holes as well, and that's why it started leaking. So put those aside. Just to show you, this is what you would normally use if you had 10mm hole on both the case and the oil cooler. And the solution I have is you can buy these adapter seals. So they're 8mm on one side and then 10mm on the other side. And you can see that this fits nice and snugly in there. And then on the oil cooler, the 10mm side fits snugly in there. Now it also comes with these three washers, and from the research I believe these are for buses and type 3 engines, not for the Beetle, so we don't need those. They basically go on the studs. Also to note that some oil coolers have 8mm M8 studs and some have 6. This has a 6mm. But if you were to put a different style oil cooler on here, you can actually take this stud out, drill it and re-thread it for an 8mm, and obviously just drill these holes bigger, but we're going to stick with these. So just snug down the oil cooler just with these 3 nuts, and hopefully that has solved the issue. Just put the fan shroud back on now, and then we can slip it back into the car. Just like that, 4 bolts and the engine's back in the car. So now, as we did before, I'll get the oil pressure gauge, hook it up, crank it over and see if we can get oil pressure, and hopefully no more leaks. Okay people, it's a few days later again. I've got little Dusty boy here helping me out. And I managed to get the engine back in, as you saw in previously. And I just quickly hooked up the voltage regulator, so that's temporary done. I will obviously do it a little bit smarter, but it's not staying in this car either. And then I have also linked up the oil pressure gauge. I just taped it there so I could see it while I was cranking the engine over. Now, I'm not going to lie, I have just cranked it over and I know the results. So just for the camera, I'll show you what the results are. So as you can see, we have oil pressure, which is fantastic. Plus, also, it doesn't look like it is leaking anymore. So that's a double win. There's not even any oil on the floor. That's a first for me. So the next stage is I will disconnect this, I don't need this anymore, and put back in the oil pressure switch. That can go back in. And I think the next thing to do now is hook up the wiring for the coil so we get power to the distributor. I can also put in the fuel line to the fuel pump, and then I just need a pipe from the pump to the carb. Put some fuel in the carb, and then hopefully we can start this up. Let's go. Well, it's now actually a few weeks later because I have been to England and I've been ill, but now I'm better and I've got some time to crack on with this engine finally. I'm just outside enjoying a coffee, admiring my Land Rover. I just fitted a new sleeker bonnet that doesn't have the option for the spare wheel because I put that in the back there. And it was donated to me by my good friend Sandri for my birthday. Anyway, should we crack on with the engine? So what have I been up to? Right then, I set up the 1, 2, 3 ignition. I think I'll do a couple of short videos actually, one to set this up and one to tune the carb up a little bit. But what I have been up to is I wired up the shut-off solenoid. This basically doesn't allow fuel into the carb when you turn the ignition key off. And then here is the automatic choke. So I've just wired those up. I also connected up the coil and the fuel lines. Now, one thing to note that this is an older style pump, and the feed in actually goes into the bottom hose and the feed out goes on the top, and it's the other way round on the later style hoses. So, and I also fitted the air cleaner. I won't be using this one in, excuse me, in the Carman gear because I think it makes the engine slightly too tall to fit in the engine bay, and it has one that has the intake that comes off the side. So I put some hoses on. So we're all pretty much ready to go. It's been a long journey getting here, but I'm quite excited. Okay, before I go ahead and start it up, I'll explain to you some of the things you need to take care of before you do your initial startup. One thing is that because I completely rebuilt this carb, it doesn't have any fuel in the float bowl. And what happens is, because it has the mechanical pump, it doesn't have enough, or you need to prime it basically to get all the air up for it to pump. It's a bit like how the oil pump won't pump the oil through unless you put the grease in and pack it in. So what you do is, you see this little pipe at the top here. I basically get like a squeegee bottle full of fuel, and I fill that up to fill the float bowl up, and that allows fuel to pump into the engine. So that's one thing. Another thing is that if you're building an engine from all new parts, such as the cam for instance, on your first startup they suggest that you run the car for about 20 minutes or so at an idle of about 2,000 revs, and what this does, it beds in the cam. But because I'm using used parts, all within tolerance of course, I don't need to do that, so I can just start it up and I'm ready to go. So I've primed the carb, I've set my 1, 2, 3 ignition, my electronic ignition, and everything's connected and ready to go. Okay, so this has an automatic choke. So what happens is there's a coil in here that heats up when it's energized by electricity, and what that does, when you pull the accelerator, you see this lever here, this is the choke, and it will close off, so it will restrict the amount of air going in there and make the mixture richer to help with a cold start. So you can see when I pull the accelerator lever, this actually closes the choke like that, and when this coil heats up it will open, so it will click like this, and then it will run normally. So I'm just going to make sure that that's closed before I start up. You can also squirt a little bit of brake cleaner down the throat of the carb there, and this is obviously flammable, so that will help with the first startup. So I'll open the choke a little bit, squirt some of this down, and away we go. Wow, can you believe it? It started up just like that. I'm super relieved because it's been a bit of a long process to get it this far. You can obviously tell that it needs a little bit of a tune-up, so I'll go over the carb and make sure everything's set up correctly. So I just gave the carb a little bit of a quick tune-up, a little bit of fine tuning, and took it for a first test drive, and once it cleared out and the choke came off, it drives absolutely superb, runs perfectly, so I am super happy with that. So the next thing is I'm going to put this car in storage because the winter is coming, and then I'm going to crack on with the engine that actually belongs in this car. I've got some ideas and some goodies that I'm going to order for that, so stay tuned. What I should add is, now it's had its first startup, the engine's warmed up, the oil's got warm. I'm going to double check everything, make sure everything's tight, check the oil level. I might even check the valve clearances just to be sure, because now it's started up and everything's warmed, and after it's cooled down things could have moved, so I'm going to double check those things. Thanks ever so much if you've been following this series of videos. I think what I'll do is I'll put them all into one video, so if you are intending to build an engine, you have one long video so you don't have to go through my previous videos and find the bit you need. But anyway, sorry this video has taken such a long time to come out, but finally I have finished this engine. If you enjoy watching or you find these videos helpful, please don't forget to click the like button and click subscribe, because it helps get my videos out to a wider audience, and I'd be very grateful. So thanks again. Until next time, cheers.